Assalamu alaikum, ladies. Good morning.
Walaikum assalam.
Walaikum salam.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about budgets on our very first GEMS Toolbox tutorial. The reason why we came up with this, it's like there's a million different things that go into running a nonprofit organization, all kinds of little skills, all kinds of little things you have to do. And a lot of times they are in one person's head, right? They're in my head or they're in somebody's head. And what we wanted to do is share that knowledge and just make sure everybody understands these things, because anything can happen to anybody at any time. It could even just be I have to go out of town and suddenly a budget is due for a grant or something. We want to make sure people know how to create a budget, know where the documents are that we use, what the process is, some do's and don'ts. And there's been a good 4 or 5 trainings that I've been through just over the last couple of years that have shared so much really important information that I thought it would be valuable to start with this training specifically about budgets. We wanted to go into how to create a budget and how to understand a budget, and what are all the little pieces that you'll need. So at any time, if you have questions, just go ahead and go off mute and ask a question. We should be done, inshallah, by 10:30. It's not too in-depth, long, complicated. It's really the basics that you need to understand, inshallah. Okay. Okie dokie. So, Assalamu alaikum, everybody who's joining us. Fahima, Ziada, Kimberly, and Nortel, and those of you who are watching this after, inshallah. Let's get started. So what is a budget? Everybody's seen a budget. Everybody understands a budget. It's just a bunch of numbers and how much money you have to do what, right? But I really love this quote that I came across. It said, budgeting is not just for people who do not have enough money. It is for everyone who wants to ensure that their money is enough. So especially when we're running a nonprofit organization, our money is not our own. It's an amana. It is somebody else's money that they have shared with us so that we can achieve some kind of goal, right? It's something we have to spend really carefully, and then afterward we have to be able to account for it, right? So a budget is an outcome of the process that we take as an organization. It takes a lot of thought, and it shows where we're going and what we're doing as an organization. It's an action plan in dollar items. So it helps people who are implementing programs understand, okay, this is what I have, this is what I need, this is what I need to get done in a year. And then it also shows our values. So how much are we spending on salaries? How much are we spending on training our staff or volunteer appreciation? All of these things show what matters to us as an organization. And again, why it matters, it gives us a little bit of control of what we're spending, where it's going, and all the little things that we're spending on. It tells our story. So a lot of times when you have a grant that you're writing, a grant application, you have to submit your budget. Whoever looks at that budget should be able to understand, what are we doing? You know, what are we focusing on? What are our priorities, our programs? And then finally, it helps us be accountable to our stakeholders. So there's different types of budgets, right? So there's 4 that we're going to be, that we as an organization come across often, but there's also other types. Inshallah, in the future, we will need them, but right now we don't have those. The first is an operating budget or an organizational budget. This is like, for the organization, this is how much we spend on what. I feel like I am a dark blur. Give me 1 second, ladies. Do you see my face? Is it all backlit?
It's dark.
It is, right? My apologies for the interruption. I just glanced and I saw. Okay, so one is the organizational budget. So this is really line by line what we as an organization are going to spend money on and where is that money going to come from. It is a whole laundry list of what we do as an organization, right? It also has like that revenue and expenses, everything on it for the whole organization, every program that we run. And then we have a program budget. So different programs have different budgets. So for care packages, which is coming up, we have a whole budget that's specifically for care packages. Each program has its own budget, this amount of money that's allocated for that program. There's a cash flow budget, and this is something that we as an organization like I'm trying to understand and we will be implementing. And what this does is understands you have a year, right? We have a budget of $309,000 for the year. And it breaks it up month by month so that you understand how much money should be coming in this month and how much money should be spent this month. And the good thing about that is like if you go to QuickBooks or some of these account management softwares, it might just spread it out evenly for 12 months, right? But that's not how we as organizations work. Before Ramadan, during Ramadan, there may be a lot more money coming in and a lot more money spent. You know, at the end of the year, there may be a lot more coming in. So understanding when is the money going to be coming in, so you know when you have what to spend. And that's really important because if you don't want to run out of money to pay for things. So you always want to be kind of one step ahead and knowing what am I going to need this coming month? Do I have enough money coming in? Things like that. Finally, one budget we're going to talk about is grant budgets. A lot of the programs that we run are funded by grants. And when you apply for a grant, they want to know exactly how much money you're going to spend on each thing that they fund. So if they give you $5,000, where is that $5,000 going to go? And then afterwards, they ask you, okay, so where did you spend the money that we gave you? How much went where? And did you spend a little more somewhere, a little bit less somewhere? Is there any left over? Some of them may even ask for it back. So when I share the budgets, there's going to be a few different things to remember. There's different kinds of costs. There's the direct costs of running any program. So that is the amount of money I spent to buy the gift cards to give out to the women. All that money is a direct expense, right? A direct cost. Let's say another direct cost would be ordering pizza for volunteer appreciation. You know, that is something that directly went into that event. For like when we have care packages, there's a bunch of volunteers that come and we get pizza for them, right? Or catering for the interfaith iftar. All of those things are direct costs. They're directly going into that program that we specified they would be going to. In addition to that, there are indirect costs, and a lot of times these are shared across different programs. So an indirect cost would be the rent for the hub, right? This hub houses a bunch of different kinds of programs, but you know, we know how much we pay for rent, and we have to figure out what portion of that is going towards that specific program. It's an indirect cost, right? Because it's not specifically for that program, but it is something that we need to pay to make sure that the program happens, right? So say we have all these programs, coffee morning and heart work and all these things. This is the place we use them for, right? But it isn't like only for this program. So those are indirect costs. And one of those indirect costs is even my salary. Like I help run a lot of the different programs. I play different roles in those. So I have to sit down and calculate how much time do I spend on each of these things? What part of my salary will go into that? But it is a direct cost. It's an indirect cost. Okay. Another thing you might see on a budget, especially on a grant budget sometimes, is in-kind contributions. And this means, you know, either items that are donated or services that are donated to help make a program possible, right? Or a project possible. So this would be like when volunteers, a lot of our organization programs are run by volunteers. The time that you all give is valuable. Like, so when you are trying to tell the world, this is what we do, this is the value of what we do, right? If you all were paid, it would cost this much money to run that project. Inshallah, one day. But until we can pay you, we still have to account for that time because it means something. It tells a story, right? There are people that are doing that work. So then what are the process? What is the process? What are the steps? First thing that we do. And again, please just interrupt me if you need to and ask questions whenever you have them. Okay, so the first thing we do is plan for the activities for the coming year, right? And we did this in around October, September, October, November. Like that's when we were sitting down and thinking about what are we going to be doing in the coming year. If we don't do that, we're not going to know what we're going to need to spend, right? So that's always the first part. And part of that is also understanding your goals for that year. So with our programs, we try to do the POP, right? The purpose of a program, what are the outcomes we want to achieve, and then how are we going to achieve them? But that how we're going to achieve them has a price tag attached to it. So really understanding what we want to do in the coming year. The next thing we do is we review past financial performance. And Nortel helps with this piece of it, right? How much did we spend on these things last year? How much did the interfaith iftar catering cost last year? How much did it cost for rent last year and utilities? All of these things. So there's a lot of things that we can really just plug in from the previous year. There isn't that much of a difference. So it's really important to look at last time. And it also works with income, right? Where did money come in from? Which grants did we get that we might get again? Who sponsored last time? They might sponsor again. So really looking at the past. The third step is figuring out, okay, we know how we did last year. We know what we want to do next year. Now let's figure out what the expenses are going to be. Okay, so we go through and figure out for each program, what are our expenses going to be? After that, we figure out, okay, so where are we going to get the money from for all of these things, right? What are different money sources, revenue sources, and I'll share in the sample budget with you all. Number 5 is allocate for shared expenses. So those indirect costs that I talked about before, think about, okay, the rent is this much, $1,800 a month. So it's going to be around $25,000 a year. So let's now allocate that. 20% of the time is spent doing aid things, around 30 is spent sisterhood things, at 10% doing admin stuff. So we try to figure out when we're using this space, and as an organization, sometimes as a whole, what percentage of our time are we spending doing what? And then those shared expenses, we break up based on those percentages. And I'll show you what that means in a second. But we have to figure out what those percentages are going to be, right? Finally, when you have put the whole budget together, you check your math. And that is something that several grant people have mentioned in their trainings, is that sometimes people will submit a budget to a foundation or a donor or something, and they wouldn't have checked their math and it's not adding up. And that really reflects poorly upon you as an organization. So we have to make sure we go back and double check our math. And we also double check, once we see this big picture, is it really showing what our values are, right? Are we really getting that right? And finally, you just get feedback and approval. And it's usually, if we're a nonprofit organization, you have to get that approval from the board. And the board is helping the whole way with the process. Okay, so these are the main steps, that things that you have to do. Comments. Triple check the numbers, exactly, because it is it's easy to miss, because sometimes you'll go back and you're like, oh, wait a minute, there should be that, but then you don't update everything else that you had already done. So make sure before you submit your budget anywhere, you always double check the math. And it's a pretty tedious process sometimes. So I'm going to show the budgets now, but these are some things that you might see, and I wanted to just tell you what they mean. So specific expenses, again, are in our budget, we have one portion that's dedicated to specific expenses and another portion to shared expenses. Specific expenses are directly for one program and or function, and shared expenses, like I said, are across different functions. There's one expense that actually is going towards many different programs. Allocation is what you use to figure out those percentages. It could be by space. So say if you have an office, right? Say we have this hub, and my office, the little admin piece of it, is this percentage of the office. So we can say for the rent purposes, this percent is used specifically for admin. Some people do that. A line item is on the budget. I'll show you where it is. The first column is the line item. It is the nature of the expense, like what kind of expense was this? A functional expense or class. So those are the other columns, right? Which are telling you the type of activity that is being done. And those are three different kinds in our budgets. We have the programmatic expenses. So there'll be columns for aid, awareness, sisterhood, training. Those are our big program buckets. Administrative expenses, that's like just management things, board expenses, accounting, compliance, taxes, things like that. And then you have fundraising expenses. Those are expenses that are solely directed towards fundraising. Okay. I think any questions for any of that so far? You'll have more questions once I open up the budgets, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a primer before we get into it. So when we come up with our budgets at MWO, there's a process. The first thing is, again, the calendar of events that we make, and then the first worksheet that we work on is the budget worksheet. So I'm going to go into the budget worksheet first, and then I'll show how we take all of these numbers and we put them into an organizational budget. And then I'll show you the different kinds of other budgets that we have as an organization, grants or program budgets. Okay, so the first one is the budget worksheet. And I can't click on it. Hold on one second, I'll open it up. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And I will specifically share that budget. Okay. And I can share a link for it in the chat in case you need it. So this is our budget worksheet for this year. Okay, so we completed this. This was the first step of the budget making process. Not process, but I guess the second step of the process, but the first spreadsheet we make. Okay. Share my screen. Okay. So this is there's all these tabs on the bottom that you can see: admin, fundraising, aid, awareness, sisterhood, training, shared. Like these are all the different, remember what I talked about, functional expenses, the columns. Those are going to turn into the columns of the budget. And these are the line items that we have in our main budget. So these are the types of expenses that we're looking at. Okay. venues, catering, insurance or permits, contract services. So contract services, I tried to explain it here. It's the amount you pay someone for a service that they provide. So it could be like cleaning fees, or you hire someone to do mehndi henna at a party, or you hire some dude to do AV, or you pay for truck rental or something like that, or security. Like these are like you're paying somebody to do something, but they're not your employee. Okay. Another thing, like supplies, anything that you buy. Equipment is different a little bit in our budget than supplies. Equipment is something, it's not specifically for one event. It's like the sofa or a copy machine. It's an item that you buy that you use for a while. So another example would be like the clothing racks for the drive, right? But computers, these kinds of things are equipment, phones, things that are going to be used for a long time. The other things are pretty self-explanatory. Travel, sponsorships. This is, as an organization, sometimes we'll get an opportunity to sponsor different events. So this is money that we pay to an organization to be a sponsor, or we pay to a business to be a sponsor for an event. And in our organization, sponsorships, sometimes you'll see it also as grants. And it's like when we do BOSSON grants, it's the money that we pay to somebody, a big sum that we pay to somebody for a purpose. Online services are like having a website or, jot form thing. Training and curriculum. And this is sometimes if you are doing a training and you have to pay for that training. Like we had, for example, leaders in training, and it costs $300 a year to subscribe to their training platform so we can get the training material. So that would be training. But another way training and the curriculum is used is if I need to, as a staff member, go get a budget training done, like I need training on how to do a budget. So those are just basic explanations. And what we do is go through each of the different things. So for admin, we think about, for all these different categories, what will the board's expenses be? Well, they're going to have around 10 board meetings, maybe $25 a board meeting if we want to get some food for those meetings. So we try to do it realistic, but also a little bit of a limit, right? For me, I might have to meet with different people somewhere, and that way I can, meet with them and pay for lunch for when I meet with a donor or something, right? And then we have team expenses, again, for like a team training or something. Equipment is like if we need to get a phone or if we need to get any kind of equipment that our team may need. Another expense you might see here is supplies for the board retreat. What would the supplies, what is our limit? Okay, so these are basic things, and then we add them up across the different categories, right? So first, within each of these functions or classes, we look at what are all the different expenses that might pop up. And I'll give you another example, aid. So aid is one of the bigger programs that we do, right? $89,450 for this year is what we're expecting to spend. But what does, on the main budget, these totals are going to show, but what are these totals made up of? And this is where this worksheet really is in handy, because we can't, on our organizational budget, we can, but it'll be ridiculous, have 30 columns, right? Where we're going into the nitty gritty. People don't need to see that. Funders don't want to see that unless they fund a specific program like CARE, in which case we show them the CARE budget, right? But most people want the big picture, like how much are we spending on aid? And that would be the total amount. But how we figure out the total amount is thinking about all of these different items. Hakima services, how much do we pay Amani for her services? Right? She's providing emotionally to people, figuring out how much are we going to pay her, what's our limit, right? Hope in a basket, it's going to cost $21,400 to get those gift cards. For care packages, we're expecting $40,000 in expenses for those halal store, gift certificates and everything. We're expecting to pay somebody to come and clean up after a few people to come clean up after our clothing pop-up drive, right? Pop-up. So that's where we really think through, for all of these different categories, what could the expenses for each one of these projects be? Okay, and that's where we get the whole total from. Same thing with awareness. We have for violence against women, that's a really big one. What are these big expenses going to be? And for violence against women, we have a big town hall we have coming up later. So that's why these are really big numbers, because it's going to cost a lot for the venue, for catering, and all of those things, right? And there's some programs that are not going to cost a lot, like Literary Society. All we really need is, a little bit of money for snacks, and in case we have a guest speaker or somebody come in, an author, a little bit of a gift for them. So that's what, for each of our program categories, we have that. We put all the individual projects, look at all the different possible types of costs, and we divide them up into each specific project within a program category. Does that make sense? Yes. So for Boss Women, right? Because we weren't anticipating giving out any grants this year, since we haven't started, it's a lot less than it was last time, right? But we still have a little bit allocated just in case when we get started. So we have some money for some food. We can do little, at the end of the year, maybe some printouts, have some printouts of certificates, but also some little, goodie things, some appreciation things for either the students or whatever. And in once we invited Sister Halima to do a presentation, and she charged $500. So that's what that is for, in case we want to invite somebody. So everybody, it's pretty simple, right? So we just go into each specific project or program, and then we add everything up and figure out how much it'll be for that whole class, that whole type of expense, right? Training expense. Okay, we're good? Any questions? No? Okay. Oh, shared. Let me just show you what shared looks like. So shared, go ahead.
You're doing very well, Sadaf.
Thank you.
I am understanding it.
Thank you.
Alhamdulillah.
So the shared expenses are a little bit different, right? Because if you look at all of these categories that we have for the programs, these are specific expenses. In the presentation I talked to you about, these are very easy to specifically allocate to each program. But there's some things that are shared expenses that we use the formula for, and we figure out what are those shared expenses going to be based on how much was spent on that last year, right? And so this is where we take the salaries for Alyssa and I, and we think about, well, Alyssa and I, we work with all the different program teams. We are in all of their meetings. We are, working on all the different stuff, as well as leading some violence against women programs, coordinating the summit, town hall, things like that. So in the end, it's still just a salary, but then in the main budget, I'll show you how we divide it up and allocate it, right? But these are other shared expenses. So these are expenses primarily that go into, especially from number 2 to number 22, like these things right here are, a lot of them are associated with the hub, right? And that's like utilities, telephone, the occupancy expenses, the supplies, and the supplies are like coffee pods and water and snacks to keep everything stocked, But when we stock up that coffee pods and the water and the snacks, they're being used by everybody that comes to coffee morning. They're being used by people that are here for Literary Society, people that are here for heart work, for everything, right? So they really aren't just administrative expenses, they're for the programs. So we will be allocating them out, but they're shared by a lot of different programs. Another one that you'll see in a lot of organizations is insurance. It costs us $1,800 in insurance every year. And that is because as a nonprofit organization, we need to have a specific kind of insurance that protects our board members and that helps us have events. So if we're having an event, say at Rollins College, or we're having the Interfaith Iftar, they're going to ask for our, to be added to our insurance and get a little certificate, and you can do that with the insurance company. But these kinds of things we have to pay for, and they help us run this organization, right? Another big one here, actually we updated it on the main budget. It says taxes and government fees here, and payroll taxes is here, but we might have combined it, right, Nortel? I think we have it combined. So things like payroll taxes, they're part of, so they're a big expense we have to pay, not just payroll taxes. We have all kinds of other little fees that we have to do for, like, so the state of Florida, any state you have to register with them if you're going to be collecting donations, over $50,000 worth of donations for your organization. And a lot of people don't know all of these different fees, right? You all just will come to Coffee Morning or Heartwork, but what you don't realize is to have a nonprofit organization, you have to pay fees, even though we're nonprofit, tax exempt, all that. It costs like what, 200-ish, right, Nortel? Is it 200 for the state solicitation form around?
Yeah, it's 200 now,
Yeah.
plus the Division of Corporations,
Yeah.
approximately $70. So let's just round it to $300.
Yep. So those are just every year. To be listed as a nonprofit organization and to be able to collect money, we have to pay those things, and that money has to come from somewhere. So it's really hard sometimes when people just want to give for care, right? Because all these shared expenses go into running all of our programs. Subscriptions. So subscriptions are things like Jotform. So Jotform is like a platform that we use to collect information, like for forms, registration forms, that is also integrated with a payment capability. So for sponsorship forms, we use it. We use it a lot of times for registration forms that have a fee, like Hakima registration, where we need a lot of information, but then you can also pay. So those kinds of things. But there's also subscription to, what's it called? Bloomerang, right? Which is, we have to pay monthly, and we divide this up between online services and subscriptions, right? All of these things, like online services, we have to pay to have a website. You have to think through, what are all those expenses going to be to run this organization? When we're looking at things like marketing, right over here, marketing and advertising, I put $1,000. You might be thinking, what could that possibly be? That is like all the merch that we give out, like that is our budget for the merch. So if we want to make little cute tumblers or pop sockets or t-shirts, we have to pay for it. And it helps people realize, hey, there's a Muslim women's organization out there. So all of those expenses, they're accounted for here. Okay. Postage, mail, all of these things. So these are shared across different categories, in our organization. We have other expenses that are shared. They're not purely admin because they have a component of, we need them for the programs that we do, right? So things like volunteer orientation. Our programs are run by volunteers. We coordinate a volunteer orientation every year. So it is a shared expense because it's something necessary to implement our programs, but it's really intangible, right? And it's not necessarily calculated with the same allocation percentages, because there are some programs that have a lot of volunteers and others that don't. So the percentages allocation is a little bit different for each of these, but these are really things that help make sure that our programs are successful and have a team, but they're not necessarily administrative compliance management, like have nothing to do with the program kind of expenses. Okay. Okay, now let me share the next one is the organization budget. So we take all of those numbers and we put them into here. Okay, so these were, if you remember, those specific categories. These were the shared categories that I just showed you, along with the payroll, right? So what we do is plug. Let me move this thing off the top. Sorry, ladies. I have like a Zoom bar up here. Okay. So you saw the totals here. 200, 2,500, blah, blah, blah. We take all of those totals. It's right here. They're a little bit after the worksheet, we rearranged a few little expenses, but this is where we got these numbers from. And if you look over here, right, for awareness, you see the columns: awareness, leadership training, sisterhood, aid, admin, fundraising. Those are our tabs from here. So if you look at sisterhood, right, it's 5,900, 400, blah, blah, blah. We go here, we look at sisterhood, 5,900, 400, blah, blah, blah. Got it? So those totals come into this big master budget, right? Each of those tabs had a total, and we know where this total came from, right? We took each project within that category and we added up, what is the catering going to be for all those projects? And we put them in here. Does that make sense? Yes? We're good?
Yep.
Okay, cool. And the same thing with admin, all those different little admin expenses. We try to just add everything up. These are the specific expenses that we fill in. Okay. And then the shared expenses are here. And then how do we get these numbers? All of these little numbers. These are based on the allocations, right? So remember I told you there are percentages that we allocate things by. So when we're looking at our work as an organization, how much time are we spending on these different kinds of things as an organization in general and at the hub in general, right? And this is how we divide it up. And these percentages change every year, because every year when we're planning out our calendar, it looks different, right? There's a lot more happening in sisterhood nowadays than there used to. And there's a lot of time being spent here at the hub working on those kinds of things, having coffee mornings, things like that. There's also a lot happening as an organization when it comes to awareness building. There are so many things that we're doing, like the women's health meetings that we have here. We have also all kinds of meetings that you all may not even be at, but we're coordinating violence against women programs here. We are working as an organization on coordinating a big summit, but the staff is working on it. And as an organization, we're spending a lot of time on that, right? So if a funder looks at our organization, they can see these are our priority areas, right? This is how much time we're spending on each of these things. When we're looking at aid, in the past, it would probably have been 60% of our time spent on aid, right? Care packages, Hope in a Basket. And that was pretty much most of what we did. But it's been changing a lot. And that is one of the things that we do, but it's not necessarily most of what we do. It's a lot of what we do during a couple of specific months, but not necessarily the rest of the year. So we go and we really try to figure out what are the percentages based on the amounts of different programs and where we're spending our time. And we do the same thing for me and for Alyssa. So thinking about where are we spending a lot of our time? Alyssa is supervising a little bit more of the Women's Action Network things, and I'm working a little bit more on the sisterhood things because I'm here. So there's a little bit of a change. I'm doing, she's doing a lot of that, a little bit more of the admin part, but I'm doing a little bit more of the fundraising part. So we really put a lot of thought into where are we spending our time, who's doing more of what, where are all of these expenses going, and we come up with this big budget. And like I said, with the shared expenses, like these big shared expenses, like a volunteer appreciation, they're a different ratio, right? So if you look at community engagement, it's a lot more to build sisterhood, to increase the women that are just connecting with each other, right? But if we're looking at volunteer appreciation, we have very few volunteers, volunteers time spent on fundraising, and this maybe a couple people here, a couple people there, but we have a lot more people working on awareness building kind of things. We have the women's health, we have violence against women team, we have the Hakima team. We have so many different team members working on it, and we divide it up based on that. And volunteer orientation is a similar allocation. Okay, so everybody understand where all these expenses are coming from, what all of this means. If you saw this, it would make sense to you. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Yes, no. Any questions about the expenses part of the budget? We're good.
Actually, I have a quick question. Sadaf.
Yeah.
For the budget, like I may have missed it the first 15 minutes, but what is your starting calendar date for budgeting?
Yep. So every organization is different, right? Some organizations, for us as an organization, we have January through December. So January 1st through December 31st is how we do it. Other organizations may have a June, July kind of timing, right? They'll go from July to June every year. So you have those two main different types that you'll see. But for us, it's January to December. We, as an organization, will recruit team members. We do a lot of the onboarding. We've decided to come up with the system just recently. In July, we'll have a big volunteer orientation. In August, but that gets everybody kind of in position so we can do our calendar planning for the coming year in September and get all of that done, and then start working on our budget October, November, so that it's being approved by the board in December. And then we have that money approved to be spent January 1st through December. Does that make sense? And everybody's will be different. So there's some organizations that may do, the ones that start in July and end in June, they may be doing it very differently. Their calendar, they may be planning the same way, but their budgeting is a little bit on a different schedule because they're reporting a little differently. A lot of times in your bylaws, you have to indicate what your fiscal year is. And sometimes when you're applying for different grants, they'll also ask you what your fiscal year is, and that's where you put that in. But we as an organization do January through December. Okay. And that is a part of it. I think I left out of this is coming up with that calendar, right? What is your budget calendar? When are you going to do your calendar planning or figure out what you're going to need money for? When are you going to create your budget? When are you going to get approval? When are, the whole year. So figuring that out is really important. And I think I should include that next time, but thank you for bringing that up, Fahima. So we have the expenses and then we have income. How are we going to pay for all of this? One thing that I didn't mention that we try to add is this thing down here that says operating reserve fund. This is really wide. I'm so sorry. It could have been bigger for you. So operating reserve fund. So we're hoping that we can raise more than we spend so that we can have a little bit of a cushion. COVID really threw a lot of organizations for a loop. You had to shut things down. But emergencies like that could happen at any given moment where you just have to really, you take a bump in your fundraising. But it's important to have a bit of a cushion built in, and some people recommend 6 months of expenses, but at least 3 months worth of expenses should be in your account at all times, because anything can happen that require you to just kind of have a little bit of a buffer. So we're trying to build that up. We're hoping to spend a little bit less than we raise. Our fundraising goal is $308,000. And this shows where do we think we are going to get that money. We look at, to get these numbers here, we look at some grants or funding that may be coming in for specific programs. But we also look at individual contributions. And the main sources of funding you're going to have as an organization are either you're going to get grants or money from foundations, okay? Or you're going to get money from corporations or sponsorships. You might get individual contributions. So that is like just somebody giving you a check or a Facebook fundraiser, or people who are signed up as monthly donors, right? Another one is a government grant or like stimulus funding that we got one year. And then finally, we have this these random little categories like merchandise, right? Like selling t-shirts, or program revenues, tickets, or you have special events. You might raise money just by a special fundraising event that you have. And finally, there's dues. So these are the different kinds of expenses. And what we do as an organization is really look at who are potential funders when it comes to grants, like who might be able to give us a grant, has given us a grant in the past year, or are we have already committed to giving a grant for this year, and how much is that? So that's what this money, these are, right? These are specifically grants. Penny Appeal gives us a $20,000, two $10,000 grants a year, one for care, one for Hope in a Basket, right? Islamic Relief gives us a 42,000 mashallah grant this year. It's been going up progressively, and this is for our violence against women work. Pay for our Hakima, pay for our violence against women. We're actually doing coordinating a violence against women training, a cultural sensitivity training for Harbor House, which is a shelter here. Those kinds of things are funded through Islamic Relief. We have an Office of Violence Against Women grant. We are a sub-grantee of HEART. So anytime we help a woman that is a domestic violence survivor and Amani shares resources with her, or we as an organization help, or we coordinate something for a shelter or anything, we get $80 per hour funded from the Office of Violence Against Women, the federal office, through a grant that HEART got. So these are all different grants that we're getting. Our local community foundation, we were expecting 5,000. These are all just, historically grants that we've gotten that we are expecting again. Okay. And then corporations and sponsors, these are people that sponsor regularly. So these are the different programs. They're the aid sponsors. These are people that we know are going to sponsor, inshallah, for care, for Hope in a Basket. So hopefully it'll be even more than this, right? If we're on track. But we wanted to have at least a minimum understanding of what that might look like, right? This is if we have a town hall, we're looking for sponsors, and it'll be hopefully 20, 500. When you're looking at sisterhood, we're looking at the interfaith iftar. Maybe we can get some sponsors for that, right? So we think it through. It takes a lot of time to sit down. I sat down with Yasmin, Nortel, with Alyssa, with a bunch of different people to figure out where are we going to get all this money from. But when you do this, then you feel like you can breathe. Alhamdulillah, I figured it out. I think I know where I can get all this money from, right? We're hoping we can get $115,000 just from individual donors. 400,000 for care and Hope in a Basket. And then hopefully if we can do this fundraisers throughout the year, our goal is to get 75,000 through fundraisers, smaller fundraisers. And these are, again, for care, people are going to give, and then at any fundraiser they might give. And these might also be online fundraising campaigns, right? And then monthly giving. Our goal is a lot higher than it was in the past. We are hoping to get 20,000 from monthly giving. This year we got 15,000 in monthly giving, and we want to increase that to 20, and that would require 400 extra earned per month. So we think it through, like we really do the math and we think it through. Facebook fundraisers are technically a donor advised fund, and we're hoping to get around 10,000 from Facebook fundraisers. So all of this, we sometimes we're going to get it for a specific program. Sometimes it'll just be general fundraising that comes in. These are grants that we got from the city and county. We're hoping to fund our operating expenses, which are just purely admin expenses, which is hard to find. So that's our fundraising part of the budget, you know, and a lot of times when you're sharing out with donors and stuff, you're not sharing the revenue part of it. You might just say total revenue for the year, blah, 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 but mostly they want to know your expenses. A lot of times when you're submitting a grant application, they will ask you, what percentage of your money are you going to get for grants, from grants? What percentage from sponsorship? What percentage from individual contributions? And they want to know that you're getting a little bit from everywhere. Because if you're getting all of your money from individual contributions, or 80% of it just from individual donors, and suddenly there's an earthquake in Turkey, and or there's a hurricane here locally, and people's individual contributions are going there, then you may be in a lot of trouble because people just don't have the capacity to give to you as well. Or if you're all relying solely on these big foundation grants, and suddenly the grant, which happened to us once, they're like, sorry, we only fund for 2 years. And the next year, like, there were 2 different grants that just kind of have only a 2-year limit. And so that was like, oh man, that's like $20,000 now that we have to figure out where we're going to get from. So trying to really have a balanced revenue stream is really important, and they look at it because for a funder, somebody who wants to support you as an organization, they want to know that you can take care of this program without them too if you need to. They want to know that your work is sustainable, and showing that it's coming in from all these different sources helps share that picture. Okay, everybody cool on this? Any questions?
Yes. Yeah, this was very good.
Awesome. And this, you know, if you're starting an organization, a business, all of these things you might need to think about. So even if you're starting your own business, you want to know, what will your expenses be, right? It won't be this crazy complicated columns. It may just literally be these yellow columns, right? What are your expenses going to be for your business? But you also want to take some time and think about, how am I going to pay for all those expenses? Am I getting investors? Am I getting sales? What are my sales numbers supposed to look like for a year? What are the different sources that I can get? You know, are there government grants I can get for this business? All of that is really important. You know, advertising, people may want to advertise on your website, wherever that is, really take some time to think it through. Okay. So when you look at it, even though our total expenses, right, are $291,000, when you spread it out across, how we allocated it, right, to different kinds of programs, it's actually around 66,000 for awareness programs, 26,000 for leadership training programs, around 40,000 for sisterhood programs, 111 for aid programs, and around 32 for admin, and only 17,000 for fundraising. And then when you look at the percentages of these, right, what is this as a percentage of the whole, which sometimes funders are looking at and donors are looking at, you'll see that we're actually spending around 17% of our time on non-programmatic things, right? And if you look at organizations like Islamic Relief or Second Harvest Food Bank, any of these big organizations, you'll see that they have very little overhead, right? This is considered overhead expenses. But in the end, they understand they're doing this. They're looking at the rent that they're paying, and they're actually looking at how much is going towards different functions, and they're allocating it in that way. And that's how they're able to show accurately that it's not overhead. And there's a trend in philanthropy and nonprofit organizations to really explain to our communities that all of the expenses we have are required to run this organization. We are not here sitting here paying for a website just for the sake of having a website. That having a website is not an operating expense. It's actually part of implementing a program. If people don't have that website to come to find out about care and pay and make a donation, or to find out what where our calendar is and register for events, then we can't have those events. So it's all really, there's culturally a shift, and part of that is being able to show where are things being allocated, right? Do we have to have like a board retreat? No, we don't have to have a board retreat. We don't have to spend $1,600 on a board retreat this year. But is it important? Yes, it is, because the board is sitting down and this year, hopefully coming up with a strategic plan, right? Because our strategic plan is ending. So for the next 5 years, what is our vision for organization? What are our priorities supposed to be? What are the programs we want to implement? When do we want to do what by? That is coming from the board. If they don't have time and space to figure that out, then we'll not be able to grow as an organization. We need all of those pieces. And in the beginning, when we first started running a nonprofit, we'd feel so guilty, like, oh, should we have volunteer appreciation? Is that a waste of money? No, it's not a waste of money, because if we're not showing our volunteers that we care and being grateful how we should be as Muslims, as human beings, then those volunteers are not going to volunteer for you for long, and then you're not going to have a program that you can implement either. So all of it is important, and it plays a role, and every expense is for a reason, and you should be able to tell that story in your budget. And a lot of times when you're submitting a budget, they also give you a part where you can submit a budget narrative where you can explain some of these expenses a little bit more in words. We're good with this? Okay, the next two are easy. That's a hard one. So I'm going to go over the next couple of easy types of budgets, and then we'll call it a morning, inshallah. Thank you all for being here this early. I was expecting just me and Kimberly to sit here and chat. Okay. So this is a budget report, a final report that I submitted actually for the Islamic Relief Grant that we received. And this one is a doozy, right? I wanted to show it to you. I'll just show it up to here. So I had to actually think this thing through, make the whole budget. This is from our previous grant that we got from them, not for this year, but the whole, before we even come up with a budget, we had to do a whole project planning document that they asked for. And, you know, I'm so grateful to Islamic Relief because they had us sit down and do these things. They shared this template with us. They shared a project planning template with us where we thought about what are our outcomes and everything. And it helped us develop the skills that we need. It's not like they were asking for things and not showing us how to do it. They actually shared these things out with us. So at that time, this was in 2021 when I applied for it, and then around 2022 is when that money came in, and that was the whole year, 2022, 23, that it was used for. So we had applied for our gender equity initiative, which was a lot of violence against women, the Real Talks, the Hakima training we were just starting up, all of that. And this right here, the contribution, this is what so they gave us $29,175,000, right? And I had to sit down and think about, in this budget, I'm saying we as an organization are going to have Hakima training, we are going to have a GEM summit, we are going to invite trainers to talk about sexual violence, invite trainers to talk about, you know, leadership training things. I had all these big ideas, right? That we're going to do this, we're going to do that. A lot of these things were across different programs. Some of it was Hakima training, which is training kind of programs. This also included leadership toolbox trainings and leadership trainings. So I included the Halima de Oliveira that came $500, but it was a leadership training program, right? So anything that was associated with empowering women, I really just put it all in this grant. I didn't think they were going to fund it, but they actually gave everything that I requested. Alhamdulillah, I'm so grateful to them. But I thought about across different programs, what are all the different expenses that could tie into empowering women? And I made this whole long budget, right? So these were the direct costs that are associated with empowering women, right? And then these were the different projects that I wanted to do that were associated with empowering women. These are the direct costs of those projects, right? Travel for speakers, the GEMS Summit venue, catering, all of it, right? Workshop supplies, all of these things. They had a specific cost. So say if we wanted to do leadership toolbox trainings, and we wanted to have 6 of them, leadership trainings, and it would be $500 each, that would be a total of $3,000 for that one expense. None of this was on our big organizational budget, right? It was in different ways because I had training fees as part of Boss Women. I had training fees as part of Violence Against Women. I had to pick out for each of those things which ones are related and put them all in here. Okay. And so this is how much I thought we would spend on it. This is how much we actually spent on it. So this is our expenses to date. And this is the amount of funds from Islamic Relief that we used, right? This was what Islamic Relief said that they would fund. So a grant budget looks really different. There's some shared expenses. My time, right? At that time, the hub, because we had some programs here, we had different trainings here. All of this, I calculated out. I figured out how much of it Islamic Relief would be contributing towards, and how much we would pay for. So it's a little bit more complicated. This last year, we got a $5,000 grant from Central Florida Foundation. And it was a Violence Against Women grant. So we had to, the good thing about Central Florida Foundation, they also funded, shared expenses, not just direct costs, but indirect costs. So remember I talked to you about indirect costs and direct costs. So the direct project costs I listed here, and it's very similar to that last one. There was a little bit of overlap with the summit and everything. But they gave us $5,000, right? And they're going to want to know, okay, we said we're going to give you $5,000. How much of that did you spend? What were your total expenses for that category? They want to know all of these things, right? This is what we budgeted for our Violence Against Women programs last year. This was the total cost of those Violence Against Women programs. This is how much they said they would give, and this is how much we spent of what they said they would give. And then I added a little description of where we got the rest of the money. Registration fees, we had other grants, we had sponsors and tickets, right? Does all of that make sense? But this looks very different than our organization's budget. So, or our budget worksheet, right? What I had done is, if you look here, all of these different things that have to do with empowering women, I actually went and I added up all kinds of different training fees and everything. And I included it all in one budget. And you can't just put things for the sake of putting them. They have to be accurate. They have to actually be the numbers, that you spent, because they will ask for receipts. So then when it's time to do a grant report, I have to go back and look at all the receipts. How much did we pay in salaries? How much did we pay for the rent? How much did we pay for utilities? Let's get the receipts, put them all in a folder, share that folder. The GEMS, the summit venue, how much did it cost? Let's put it all, all the receipts together. I have to show it. I have to prove it. I can't just be claiming that I spent this money and not have any invoices or receipts. It's a lot of work, and that's why getting grants is hard and reporting on grants is hard, and a lot of times bigger organizations do it. Have people hired specifically just to do this, like my daughter Samiha, this is what she does for Northwestern University. She does grant administration. Inshallah, one day we will have funds to hire a grant administrator because it's a lot of work. Ugh. Any questions? It's okay. I know it looks confusing, but like one thing to keep in mind here too is, so say we hire somebody to do our website content, right? And we want to add some things to it. If we have a web content coordinator, maybe 25% of their time would go for this program, is what we estimated. Violence Against Women Task Force, 100% of their time would go for this, Violence Against Women Task Force funding program, right? Women's Aid Coordinator, part of our Women's Aid is helping survivors, so 20% of that time would go, right? So I have to actually think through what percentage of their time. But even though this is a staff person, I don't pay them, so there's nothing here. There is a calculation when you have a volunteer, you'd pay, like, I think nationally $27 an hour is their in-kind donation. So you can actually add that as an in-kind donation and then just say that it was funded in kind, so that it shows that they spent that time doing it. Okay. And we'll end with an easy one so that you're not super overwhelmed. Program budget. So this is care packages from 2022. I have newer versions, but this is the one I just came out of my drive really easy. So 1 year, Penny Appeal had given us $5,000 for to pay for Eid gifts. Okay. They wanted a budget for the whole care packages, care program. So we provided the whole care program budget. And when you're doing a grant or program budget, sometimes they want this, right? Like, so for this, they want to know how much is one unit for, how many of that unit do you need? How much does that mean you're budgeting for? How much did you actually spend? These kinds of things are usually in grant budgets or program budgets. So for care, we thought through, okay, we're going to have to get grocery gift cards. We're going to have to get Zakat al-Fitr gift cards, halal store vouchers, maybe purchase some dates, print out some little Eid cards, blah, 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 buy the Eid toys, all of that. We thought through how much would that be. And so say for Zakat al-Fitr, we were going to get around 250 gift cards that are $100 each. So it would be $25,000, $40 for shipping. We would get them from Walmart, right? Halal storage vouchers, we thought we would give out 150 women, around $150 worth. So we calculated it out, and these were the actual expenses. So this is what we calculated. We ended up that year getting a ton more money than we expected. So we added extra money for Zakat al-Fitr gift cards. We didn't think we would have to spend that, but we had so much money, we wanted to give it out as soon as we could, and we gave those gift cards out. But this shows for that program where the money was spent on the specific program. Okay, so it's almost like a breakdown of this. So this is just, care, and sometimes it'll just say $40,000 for supplies, right? But what this does is actually break it down. Supplies would mean this plus this plus this, right? So you're digging a little bit deeper within that program. When we say supplies, what are the supplies we think we're going to buy? How much are each of those things going to cost? And how much did we actually spend on it for a specific program? And what we try to do is for anybody that donated, and especially foundations or these Penny Appeal, we try to send them after the project budget, like, hey, thank you so much for your donation. This is where your $5,000 went. This is how much we paid after that $5,000. Thank you so much for making all of this possible, right? Good. So for any of your programs, if you're having a program, you're hosting an interfaith iftar, doing the same thing. How much will it cost for AV? How much will it cost for decorations? How much will it cost for blah, blah, blah? Like all of those little items, break it down so that when you're spending, you know how much you're going to need. And if someone's in charge of decor, telling them, hey, you have $300 to spend, right? Because you know what your budget is. And as team members, you would know your budget from here. So you go to sisterhood, okay, interfaith iftar right here. This is what I have to work with. Let me make sure I can always stay within this money. Okay, I can get favors for $300, blah, blah, blah. Supplies, 150. How am I going to break that down? Okay. Inshallah. So that's the program budget, just some final tips, things to keep in mind. Be realistic about your needs. Do not overestimate or overstate. You don't want to show $1 bazillion and then you don't really need that many dollars. It's really important to be as accurate as possible because you're gonna have to show that you spent it. And sometimes when you don't spend it, they'll ask for that money back. Don't forget costs either. So you don't want to inflate things, but you also don't want to leave things out, because if it ends up that you're running this program and you had to pay for something because you didn't plan it out appropriately, you're going to have to pay for it out of your pocket, right? Out of the general organization's money. And follow the directions, especially if you're making a budget for a grant. Look at what they ask for. Do they have a template? Like Islamic Relief sends us that template and they say, okay, use this template for your grant. And we're like, okay, I'm going to use this. Like, let me plug it in. So follow the instructions that people give. And finally, triple check your math. And I think we're done. Any questions? Let me stop sharing. Yay, we finished right before 10:30. I am very happy. Didn't think I would get it all in.
Alhamdulillah, you did so excellent, such an excellent work of explaining it, Sadaf. I think you should have a budget class of your own. That's all I'm saying.
You're so sweet. Thank you.
No, it's the truth. It was
Mm.
very clear, very well explained. So hopefully our board will look at this and understand the
Inshallah.
numbers. Inshallah.
And I will be putting on the slides the resources where I got everything, because it's actually 3 or 4 different classes. And I wanted to make sure I give them credit, inshallah. So
Inshallah.
add to the slides and share that out. Thank you, Fahima, for joining all the way from Gainesville.
All right. Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah. Thank you. This is really, really helpful. And as usual, Sadaf is excellent in explaining everything. Alhamdulillah.
You're sweet. Thanks, Fahima.
Yeah, but
For
this is
those who
very
don't know,
helpful.
Fahima is
Great job.
Homera's sister joining from Gainesville.
Hey.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum,
Salam.
ladies. Have a
Salam.
nice Sunday. Inshallah, I'm gonna stop. Assalamu alaikum.